Good evening, folks. Welcome to Mike on the Vikes. It's Josh here, and it's a very sad Josh because the Wolves did not show up tonight, and we dropped Game 2 as well to Dallas. And so, um, I know you know me as Mike on the Vikes, and I have all the Viking paraphernalia behind me, but I'm also a big Wolves fan. I've been one since I was a kid when it was the last time we were in the Western Conference Finals, and so naturally, this was another tough loss. You know, I'm not going to talk Wolves tonight, but I definitely could. There were some bad calls down the road or down the stretch by the refs, and Luka makes a big shot, and then Nas is in and out. Like, we could have won the game still, but we have bigger issues to fry here. Dallas had a million alley-oops, and our defense isn't there. Ant is not playing at his potential right now, and so the Wolves have a lot of looking in the mirror to do before Sunday. So I'm not going to dwell on that because this is Mike on the Vikes, not Mike on the Wolves, and but it's going to be hard for me to be a little bit more positive. I'm trying to switch gears right now. That's why you're hearing me struggle with the transition. But anyway, appreciate anyone that joins in, listens to this later, or, of course, on the podcast, as is the main medium of Mike on the Vikes. And tonight's focus is Vikings fourth-round pick Khyree Jackson out of Oregon. He's a defensive back we drafted at pick 109. He's a really fun story, actually. I was reading up on him a little bit earlier. He dropped out of school, I believe it was Arizona Western or something, and moved back to Maryland and didn't tell anybody. This is all according to an article at Vikings.com, by the way. He was working at the deli at a grocery store, and then he was also playing a lot of NBA 2K, because I guess he was about to join a tournament. He was in the top 250 of NBA 2K league, of an NBA 2K league. I don't know how those work, so that was pretty impressive to get that far anyway. And then whatever happened, he ended up going back to community college and, getting back into the college circuit and eventually transferring to Alabama where he's a backup. And then last year ends up on Oregon having a really good year. And so kind of a long roundabout way to get to the NFL. And yet now he's here and he's one of the Vikings draft picks. And obviously cornerback was a huge, first of all, so kudos to Khyree Jackson for getting this far. I try to remember what I was like at that age, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the right decision is, and you just kind of, flying by the seat of your pants to some extent. So good on him for realizing that he had a window to get back into football if he wanted to, and he made the most of it. And now he's in the NFL. So obviously, wish him the best of luck, and of course, as a Viking, I hope he has a great long career naturally. So it looks like a good pick for the Vikes. Cornerback is definitely an area of need, and honestly, it's one of those premier positions where even if you have a couple good quarterbacks, it doesn't hurt to draft another one. As a fourth round talent, we're looking at Khyree Jackson. I don't know where he'll end up as his career. I'll say off the bat, I think he can be a cornerback too, like a starting corner in the NFL. And if you get that in fourth round value, I think that's great. And so, anyway, I was looking at our minimal amount of draft picks this year and everyone's focuses on the first round, rightfully so. It was a great first round for us. We got our quarterback. We got in my opinion, the highest upside edge player in the draft in Dallas Turner. And so I love that. What I didn't love was watching so many picks go by before we took another player. And so, in a weird way, for me, there's a lot of importance on the Khyree Jackson pick because of the fact that, in between 17 and 109, that's, what is that, 92 picks? Oh, that's a terrible math, I'm sure. But anyway, a lot, maybe 82 picks. I don't know. I can't do math right now. I'm still mad about the Wolves, who lost by 1. There's some basic math for you. Anyway, they kind of an important pick because we missed on a lot of players to move up, and just in general, we don't have a lot of draft picks going forward. So we really got to hope that we can hit on some of them, and I think we have a chance on Khyree Jackson. So I figured I'd devote some airtime to him. I looked into some of his tape. I watched a lot of his game against Washington, one of the games, because I believe there was a game against Washington, like the Michael Penix-led Washington Huskies, who boasted that receiver trio who all went in the draft, right? Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and I'm blanking on the other player's name. I apologize, but there was a game where Khyree Jackson played really well with Oregon and didn't play as well. But I've also seen some reports he was kind of injured in one of the games, so who knows what to expect from it. But I went back and watched a lot of his reps in one of the Washington games, and also his game against USC, because of course that was Caleb Williams. I thought I was curious about that one. And I'll be upfront about the fact that I am not going to sit here and pretend I'm a film expert. This is just kind of my take, right? As is my calling card. I'm just another Mike on the Vikes. I'm probably not the first and foremost. So anyway, Khyree Jackson. What I like about Khyree Jackson, we'll start there, is his size. He's 6'3", almost 200 pounds. I love that. In the NFL, you know, I mean, it's been changing over the past handful of years. I remember when corners were like 5'8", 5'9", 5'10". We were lucky if they were 5'11", and then all of a sudden there are more and more receivers at 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and it's like, how are how are they going to make up for these inches? And so, now corners are 6 flat, 6'1", 6'2". It does feel like everyone's getting taller who plays corner. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it feels that way. But still, 6'3" is great. I love that length. And actually, he is really near the top of percentiles if you look at his draft profile of height and of reach and spread. And so I think that's huge. Honestly, I think that's it. It's not just length that was the problem, but I think back to the game against the Cincinnati Bengals, who were starting Jake Browning right last year. We were in the Nick Mullen weeks where we were still fighting for the playoffs. We were still just needed to win a couple games, and we would have snuck in as wild card, and we couldn't do it. And one of the games we lost was the Bengals game in overtime, and we were up by a touchdown, and it was late in the game. Jake Browning hucks the ball up deep, and there's T. Higgins, towering over at Caleb Evans. Now I have my own. Caleb Evans was my guy, and I didn't like some of his lack of tenacity I saw. And I don't know if that was scheme. I don't know if that was mentality or nothing. I'm not calling him out necessarily. I just, T. Higgins makes that catch, and as he's falling out, he reaches the ball over the plane, he scores a touchdown. I was like, what? How in the world? And so when I saw that Khyree Jackson was 6'3", immediately my head went there. And I'm not saying that he would have stopped that play. I'm not saying, being tall is exactly the only way to fix that. But I do think that, being 6'3", going up against a tall receiver like T. Higgins, I mean, that has to make a difference. So I think that's honestly one of the main things I like. I think his size is very, is set up to be pretty successful in the NFL. 6'3", close to 200 pounds. I think he can be, a huge factor at the NFL level for us. And the other thing I like about Khyree Jackson is his position. And I say position because if you look at his reps, according to PFF, he almost exclusively played outside coverage. Press man a lot of the time, but almost exclusively on the outside. I mean, he took, over the course of the entire last season, he took like 30 or 40 reps in the slot, and that's about it. And then like a handful in the box. Like, he was pretty much a plug and play on the outside. And while that seems like maybe that's limiting and maybe that's not giving him enough versatility to be moved around the defense for Flores, I actually view that as a positive. I love guys because let me rephrase. I don't love guys that necessarily only do that, but what I do love and what I think cornerbacks love, I think the heart of the cornerback wants to get up on the line and press the receiver and get in his grill and get in his face and jam him at the line and make him uncomfortable and not let him get into his route. And so, when you have a defensive coordinator like Brian Flores, he's going to leave his DBs on their own on various occasions, and you want a guy that's going to go out and play and go out and get the ball and want to do that one-on-one battling. And also, as much as can be said for versatility, there's also a lot that can be said for if he ends up being a starting caliber corner that you can just plug and play on the outside and not have to worry about it. I think there's a lot to be said for that as well. And so, when I was looking at his reps, looking at the numbers that he was basically only in the outside position, I actually do kind of like that. Like, yes, versatility, moving guys around is a ploy that good defensive coordinators use to maximize their scheme, maximize the talent on the field. But there's something to be said for a guy who can specialize in one thing. And I think if he can solidify himself as a consistent starter where we don't have to worry about the fact that he's the one on the outside, I think that's a net positive for the Vikings. Again, we're talking about a 4th-round pick here, so I'm not saying he's going to be, Sauce Gardner. I'm not saying he's going to be Darrelle Revis, D'Angelo Hall. Like, I'm not saying, we're going to talk about Xavier Rhodes actually in a little bit. I'm not saying he's going to be one of those guys. We're not drafting him for that. We drafted him at pick 109. We need him to be consistent, to be a starter on the field that we can count on. And I think as an outside press coverage corner, I think he can do that. And so that gets me excited. That's another thing I like about Khyree Jackson. out of Oregon. I think that if he develops in the right way that Flores sees him as he fits into a scheme, I think he can be a really big advantage, or give us a really big advantage on the outside, something consistent. Because cornerbacks, you need depth, and let's just be honest, our cornerbacks, even if we consider Byron Murphy our best one, maybe that's not even the case, but he's probably our best one, most consistent, most proven, and it's kind of a thin room for a defensive coordinator that needs corners to be successful. So in a perfect world, we would have drafted one of the 10 guys I liked between picks 32 and 85, but of course we traded out of that. And again, this isn't a knock on the draft. Again, I think we did what we needed to do, but the unfortunate effect of all those things the unfortunate outcome of all that is that we didn't have a pick to 109. So I like that we went corner, and I think Khyree Jackson is a good pick. And obviously a couple of things I like that I mentioned there. Now there are some things that I don't like, or things that make me nervous, I should say, because these aren't, you see on the screen they're way too handsy. You see his speed. These aren't, I wouldn't say quote unquote issues, but they're also things that could be issues, and that's why I phrased it in the way, like, instead of likes and dislikes, I phrased it as what I'm nervous about versus what I dislike. And every single rep this guy has, he is tugging on a jersey, he is locking arms, he is physical to end all other physical discussions. And I like that as a football fan. You got to be physical, but in today's NFL, I watched some of those reps. I was like, well, that would have been PI. That would have been defensive holding. That would have been PI again. And he's going to have to learn that. Now, the good news is I feel like I had the same, and again, I'm not comparing him completely to Caleb Evans, but I had the same thought for him when I watched his tape before the Vikings drafted him. Because I looked at him, at the time I was writing for a website where I was actually covering the Bears at the time, and I wrote a Caleb Evans as a pick that I wanted the Bears to make. He just seemed like a good prospect, and I still think he's got a shot. I think he needs to improve on last year. And one of my complaints was one of my perceived weaknesses, I would say, I guess is the best way to phrase it, is that he was too handsy. He's going to get himself into trouble from a penalty standpoint. I don't think Caleb Evans has had that issue at the NFL, so it must be something that can be coached out of guys. But it's still something I'm nervous about, because he was not just handsy, he was really handsy. To put it into perspective, I was reading up on his profile. There's a website called NFL Draft Buzz that gives a good set of numbers for a guy's draft profile. And the weaknesses, they put it a lot more softly than I would have. It said, tendency, this is quoting NFL Draft Buzz, by the way, it says, tendency to engage in jersey pulling downfield, indicating over-aggressiveness that leads to penalties. I can't even say that without fumbling it, because that's such an egregious understatement. A tendency to pull down jerseys that leads to over-aggressive and penalties, or whatever I just quoted. It's more than that. It's every play. He's got his hands on the receiver, and within the 5 yards, that's what you want. Obviously, you want that physicality. You want that. You want a receiver to think, oh shoot, I got this guy across from me again. How am I going to get into my route? And you want them overthinking that thing, or overthinking all that stuff. But down the field, you can't do that. They're going to call that in the NFL every single play, and so big pat, especially if he's going to play primarily on the outside. You're talking 15, 20, 30-yard penalties when he gets called for PI, and then defensive holdings, obviously an automatic first down, and so you have. I think that's going to be a big issue. So I'm very nervous about that. Again, he can't possibly be the only college corner that struggles with this, and I guarantee that the NFL teams see that and they say, okay, we'll coach that out of him. We'll figure out a way. So again, I'm not saying we should panic about that. I'm just saying I'm going to be nervous about that, because you never know how long it's going to take him to catch on, or what have you, and so he is too handsy. Physicality is great. That's awesome. I love that. And you want him on that. You want your players on that side of the physicality spectrum, as opposed to not wanting to initiate contact. But you have to do within reason. You can't be too handsy. The other thing I'm nervous about is speed. And again, this is all relative, of course. He runs a 4.5 40. He's not slow. I'm not trying to say that he's slow. But in looking at his draft profile and watching some tape, and in looking at looking at some scouting videos of people who know the stuff probably better than I do anyway, there is some concern that he's going to be able to keep up down the field with some NFL wide receivers. And so this is, of course, these are probably the obvious reasons why he fell to us at 109, right? There's a reason why fourth-round pick's a fourth-round pick. And so if you can coach around that, and there, a couple things I'll mention in a little bit, there's reason to believe he can overcome that. However, when you look at his, all the things I've said so far, he's specializing on the outside, press man, cover corner. That's really physical. If he loses that initial battle, is he going to be able to recover, or are we just going to get beat deep all the time? And that's something that I trust Brian Flores to figure out. Is he going to need a lot of safety help over the top? I know everyone does at some point, or can you leave him on an island every now and again and see what happens? And so, that'll be something that the coaching staff has to work out. But there is something to be said for, I don't want to say a lack of recovery speed, but just in general, from a speed standpoint, maybe not quite at the level that you need to be when you get to the NFL. Obviously, nitpicking, he's a great athlete. I'm not trying to put any of that into question. It's just more of a, when you do what I do, when you spend your time focused on how are these guys going to be good, and we can only speculate because the games haven't happened, you kind of start to nitpick, and that's what I would say. And that's why these are, a couple things that I'm nervous about regarding Khyree Jackson is obviously the penalties can be huge, and then if he can't keep up with the speed, then it's gonna get ugly. It's gonna get ugly pretty quick. So there's a couple of things I'm nervous about. Now I have a third category tonight because likes and dislikes weren't enough, or strengths and weaknesses weren't enough. I also needed to do a miscellaneous category because, see if I can make that bigger for you. This is not these items are not necessarily issues, and they're also not necessarily strengths, but I also think they're worth mentioning. And the first miscellaneous item for Khyree Jackson is that he's quote unquote old. He'll be 25 when the season gets underway, and for a prospect, that's ancient almost. And I, again, as someone who's, let's just say I'm more than 10 years older than Khyree Jackson, it feels weird to call a 25-year-old old, but we know NFL lifespans are short. We know, depending on the position, your career can only be a few years, and that's why there's so much pressure for those contracts. That's why you want all players to get paid, because it doesn't last forever for the vast majority of players. But anyway, he's going to be 25. But I put it on a miscellaneous and not necessarily a knock, because I think there's something to be said for experience. This guy has been through a lot. He's kind of, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, he has gotten to this point in a pretty roundabout way. And so the fact that he's here now, good on him, and you have to think he's hungry. And honestly, the other thing that means is, when I looked back at where he's played, he was a backup in Alabama a couple of years ago. Last year was his really kind of first full season at the D1 competitive level. So with Oregon, he had a good season last year, and that was kind of his first full year. So there's something to be said for, he's 25, he's an older player, but the amount of reps, the amount of wear and tear is not the same as another player who's, let's say, played for 4 years at college and then redshirted and then got to be 25 before they got to the NFL or something like that. And so it's not necessarily a knock, but it is a thing to pay attention to, because 25 by NFL standards is not brand new anymore, right? Like, the guys that get in the league at 21, they're best set up for multiple contracts. It's just the nature of the business, nature of the league. So that's just a miscellaneous option. Miscellaneous detail to know. He's an older type of prospect, but that doesn't mean he can't grow, if that makes sense. I think the reason I included it is, usually the knock on a guy that's this old getting into the NFL is that, well, he has no room for development, right? He's too locked into his ways. But Khyree Jackson hasn't had quite the amount of reps, and so I think that plays a factor here. I think there's still room for him to grow, and that gives me hope for, like, my issues that I mentioned with being too handsy, for example. I think he's new enough to the level of competition where he'll be able to relearn some habits. At least I hope. The other miscellaneous thing is just in general some skills that I think he's probably above average at based on what I watched. But I'm not going to say they're like unique strengths. And you see on the screen there tackling, blitzing, and instincts. That same NFL Draft Buzz website has him in the 89th percentile as a tackler, and all the reports I read of him and what I saw from him, He's a good tackler, and that's huge for me. I hate when DBs can't tackle because sometimes you need your DBs to make tackles. And so I know that you don't want them to be the leading tacklers, and they're not going to be the leading tacklers. But at the bare minimum, you want a guy who's going to go in there and attempt to make the play. And good tacklers usually make the play. One of the scouting videos, and I'm not going to give you the exact stat because I can't reference that person that I watched off the top of my head correctly, so I don't want to screw that up. But his missed tackle percentage was really low, like as in a good indicator that he's a good tackler, and so that was exciting. His blitzing has been something of note on the strengths of all his reports and from what I've seen as well. And the instincts are the big one for me, and that's another reason I put him miscellaneous. Again, I'm not saying he's got the greatest instincts of all time at corner position or anything like that, and that's why it's miscellaneous. But it's definitely not a weakness, right? He knows when to break off his coverage to go help in the box. He knows when to he recognizes the plays. He knows where to go. Like he's a smart football player, and that might speak to the fact that he's older, right? He has had experience. I know some of it's been at the JUCO level, and as a backup, but he does have experience. But also, like I said, the upside because he hasn't been a starter for that long. Kind of talking out both sides of my mouth there, I suppose, but. Regardless, I think he's got good football instincts, a good football IQ, and I think he's just a guy that, again, under the tutelage of Brian Flores, could be really successful. And I'm looking at him to become a solid CB2. Like, I don't think he's going to be, okay, he's the guy that we're going to just set out there for the next 10 years or anything. And I don't even know if he can be our CB1. I think we might have to keep exploring that position, or Byron Murphy still might be better than him, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Khyree Jackson has some potential here. And so I think the pick was a net positive. I think the pick was smart. And I think that I'm looking forward to see him in purple next year. And I didn't even talk about, holy buckets, I'm just realizing this now. I didn't even talk about what I was going to talk about was Xavier Rhodes. Because I don't think he can be that CB1 like Xavier Rhodes was. And what I was going to say was, when I was talking about being handsy, Xavier Rhodes was good for a PI every game. At least the defensive holding every game, if not every game, at least every couple of games. Like, Xavier Rhodes got tons of penalties on him because he was physical, he was in your face. But you took that with him because when he wasn't getting penalized, he was an elite cover corner. And I wanted to make sure I went on record. I don't think Khyree Jackson's going to get to that level. Like, I don't think Vikings fans should look at him and say, okay, this is Rhodes closed again, right? I don't think that's going to be the case when you think about a handsy player, because Xavier Rhodes was good enough to overcome that, right? We didn't care what penalties he picked up because the other 90% of the time he was locked down, just completely stifling on the outside. But for Khyree Jackson, if he can learn how to make sure he doesn't get penalized 7 times a game, I think he can be an outside corner for us that plays for at least for the duration of his rookie contract as a starter, barring injury. And so I think it was a good pick by the Vikings. We needed to go corner, and obviously if he pans out, it's going to be huge because we had a minimal amount of picks this year. Next year we only have three on the book, so we have to make sure that our young guys contribute this year, especially on the ones from last year as well. So. I don't believe I have anything else regarding Khyree Jackson. Again, feeling positive in general about the pick, and I hope that he makes the team and becomes a starter, and I hope that it pushes the other guys. Like, we're still waiting to see, is there something in Andrew Booth, maybe Lewis Seen, like Caleb Evans could have a turnaround year. Like, we have some names, some guys that I've liked, but they just haven't quite panned out yet. So anyway, I figured he was probably my most intriguing pick. Obviously we're all talking about J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner, but cornerback is a very important position to me, and so I wanted to give him some run time in the offseason before we see a lot of the reports out of camp, which starts in a month and a half or so. So anyway, Mike and the Vikes did a little Khyree Jackson research, and so we're hoping for the best for him, the Oregon Duck, who is now a Minnesota Viking. I appreciate anyone who took time to listen to this. Again, this is podcast first. The YouTube thing is new, as you can tell by this super low-budget background I have going on here. But appreciate anyone who gives me a listen. Again, MikeandTheVikes.com, Mike and the Vikes on Facebook, Mike and the Vikes on Instagram, all that annoying stuff, and then at JLime8 on Twitter, because got to be different somewhere. But everybody, take a night off, relax tomorrow, and be ready to cheer on our Wolves on Sunday, as we still thankfully have the Wolves playing as we wait for the Vikings to pick up play here this summer. So have a great night, folks. Thanks for listening. It's been a Mike on the Vikes. Peace.